The priest had just asked if anyone objected to our marriage when my phone vibrated. One new voicemail. The caller ID made my blood run cold.
Grandma.
My grandmother had been dead for 4 years. My hands started shaking as I pressed play. There was no greeting, no explanation, just her voice.
Come. Certain.
Emily, if you marry him today, you'll spend the rest of your life wishing you'd listen to me. Leave this church. Go to his mother's house. The truth is waiting for you there. 5 minutes later, I walked out of my own wedding without saying a single word. And that decision saved my life. My grandmother had been gone for almost 4 years, long enough for the sharp pain of losing her to become something quieter, long enough for me to stop reaching for my phone whenever something good happened, forgetting for a split second that I couldn't call her anymore. She had been my safest place growing up, the one person who never lied to make me feel better. Whenever life became complicated, Grandma would smile, pour 2 cups of tea, and say, "People can fake words, sweetheart. They can't fake patterns. Always watch patterns." Those words stayed with me. I just didn't know how much they would matter until the night before my wedding. Everything was finally ready. The venue overlooked Lake Michigan. The flowers had already been delivered. My dress hung inside the guest room, covered in white satin. Friends had flown in from 3 different states. My fiancé, Daniel, kept sending me sweet messages all evening. "Can't believe tomorrow you're finally becoming my wife." Reading them made me smile. For nearly 2 years, Daniel had been everything I'd hoped to find. Patient, successful, funny, without trying too hard, kind to strangers, close to his mother, responsible with money. Everyone loved him. Even my father, who trusted almost nobody, called Daniel one of the good ones. I believed that too, which was why I fell asleep that night completely certain I was about to begin the happiest chapter of my life.
Then I saw Grandma.
The dream didn't feel like a dream. It felt real. She stood inside the kitchen of the old farmhouse where I spent every summer as a child. Morning sunlight poured through the windows. The smell of fresh bread filled the room. Everything looked exactly the way I remembered. Except Grandma wasn't smiling. She looked directly at me. Her blue eyes held the same calm certainty they always had. She reached across the table and gently took my hand. Her skin felt warm. "Emily." Her voice was soft, almost a whisper. "Cancel your wedding." I stared at her. "What?" She squeezed my hand. "Wake up before sunrise." Her expression never changed. "Drive to Daniel's mother's house." I felt my heart pounding. "Why?" She slowly shook her head. "If I tell you now."
She paused.
"You won't believe me." A strange sadness crossed her face. "You have to see it yourself." I wanted to ask another question. 100 questions. Instead, she leaned closer. So many people mistake comfort for truth. Her eyes never left mine. "Go before everyone wakes up." Then she whispered the final sentence. "You'll finally understand everything." I woke so violently that I nearly fell out of bed. My heart hammered against my ribs. The room was dark, completely silent. Only the sound of my breathing filled the house. I grabbed my phone. 4:17 a.m. For several seconds, I just sat there trying to convince myself it had only been pre-wedding anxiety. People dream strange things before major life events. That had to be all it was. I stood, walked into the hallway, and headed toward the kitchen for a glass of water. Halfway there, something made me stop. On the wall hung Grandma's antique clock. She'd left it to me in her will because she knew I'd always loved hearing its soft chime. It had worked perfectly for years. Tonight, it wasn't moving. The second hand rested at exactly 4:17, the same time I'd opened my eyes. A chill spread across my arms. I checked the batteries. They were new. I replaced them anyway. The clock still refused to move. I laughed nervously. "You're losing it, Emily." I actually said it out loud. "Stress. Nothing more." I walked back toward my bedroom. My wedding dress waited inside its garment bag. The invitation sat neatly on the dresser. Everything I'd spent months planning was only hours away. All I had to do was get dressed, smile for the photographs, and marry the man I loved. So, why couldn't I stop hearing Grandma's voice? Go before everyone wakes up. I paced the room. If I ignored the dream, I'd probably laugh about it years from now. But if there was even the smallest chance something was wrong, could I really forgive myself for doing nothing? No one would ever know if I drove there. No one had to know. If everything was normal, I'd come home before sunrise, shower, put on my wedding dress, and never mention this to another living soul. Decision made. I threw on a sweater, grabbed my car keys, and quietly slipped out the front door. The streets were almost empty. The sky was still black. As I drove toward Daniel's mother's neighborhood, every mile felt heavier than the last. By the time I pulled into her quiet street, dawn was just beginning to brighten the horizon. I parked across from the house. Every light appeared to be off. I took one deep breath. Then I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. The front door wasn't completely closed. I stayed perfectly still. The cold morning air drifted through the opening in the front door, carrying the faint smell of fresh coffee. My heart pounded so hard I was sure someone inside could hear it. I should have turned around. I should have gone home. Instead, I quietly pushed the door open another inch. Hello? No answer. The house looked exactly as I'd remembered from Sunday dinners. Family photographs lined the hallway. Fresh flowers sat on the dining table. Everything appeared peaceful. Then I heard voices. One belonged to Daniel. The other belonged to his mother, Carol. They were speaking somewhere toward the back of the house. I took off my shoes and stepped inside as quietly as I could. The hallway opened toward the kitchen, but before reaching it I noticed a narrow sitting room with folding doors that were slightly open. I slipped inside and carefully looked through the gap. Daniel stood beside the kitchen island wearing jeans and a gray sweatshirt. He looked relaxed. His mother poured coffee into 2 mugs. Neither of them had any idea I was there. I told you she'll never question it, Carol said calmly. Daniel nodded. I know. You've made her trust you. I had to. Carol slid 1 mug toward him. After today, everything changes. Daniel smiled. I've waited long enough. Those words made my stomach tighten. His mother lowered her voice. Just remember. She pointed 1 finger toward him. Don't let her find the paperwork before the ceremony. Paperwork? Daniel chuckled. She won't. You sound awfully confident. I know, Emily. He took a sip of coffee. She believes people mean what they say. Carol laughed softly. Poor girl. I felt every muscle in my body freeze. Poor girl? They were talking about me. Daniel leaned against the counter. Once we're married, everything becomes much simpler. His mother nodded. The timing has to stay exactly the same. It will. No mistakes. There won't be. Carol looked toward the hallway. Instinctively, I stepped farther behind the sitting room wall. For 1 terrifying second, I thought she'd seen me. Instead, she picked up her purse. We should leave. Daniel glanced at his watch. The florist opens in 20 minutes. They walked toward the front entrance. I held my breath. Their footsteps came closer. 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 Then, the front door opened. A second later, I heard Daniel lock the car with his key fob. The engine started. The sound faded down the street. Silence returned. I stayed hidden for another full minute. Only when I was certain they were gone did I slowly step into the kitchen. What paperwork? I whispered. I wasn't planning to snoop. At least that's what I kept telling myself. But after hearing that conversation, I couldn't simply walk away. The kitchen looked ordinary. Nothing sat on the counters except coffee mugs and today's newspaper. Then I noticed a door beside the pantry. A small home office. Inside stood a large wooden desk, bookshelves, a filing cabinet, everything neatly organized. The top drawer of the desk was locked. The second drawer wasn't. Inside were folders labeled with years. Insurance, taxes, property. Nothing unusual. I almost closed it. Then 1 folder caught my attention. It simply read, Wedding. My hands suddenly felt cold. I opened it. The first few pages were vendor contracts, flowers, photography, catering. Completely normal. Then another envelope rested beneath them. No label. Inside sat several legal documents. My name appeared across the top of the first page. I frowned. Why would my name be here? I kept reading. They weren't marriage documents. They were financial planning agreements, asset summaries, property evaluations, retirement estimates. Every page listed my savings, my investments, the condo I'd inherited from Grandma, even accounts Daniel shouldn't have known existed. I turned another page. Someone had highlighted several figures in yellow. Beside one paragraph, handwritten notes read, "Primary asset after marriage." Another note said, "Transfer discussion after honeymoon." I felt my throat go dry. None of this had ever been discussed with me. Not once. I carefully photographed every page with my phone. My hand shook so badly, I nearly dropped it. Then I noticed another folder beneath the first. This one was labeled only with the letter D. Inside were printed emails. The first message came from Carol. "Everything will be easier once she's officially family." Daniel had replied the same night. "She trusts me completely." Another message. "Don't pressure her before the wedding. After the paperwork is signed, she'll be more flexible." Another. "Her grandmother's condo gives both of you security." Security. That's what they called it. Not our future. Not our marriage. Security. For themselves. I kept reading. Every email chipped away at the version of Daniel I'd loved. There wasn't one dramatic confession. No single shocking sentence. Just dozens of small conversations. Plans. Timelines. Assumptions. Each one colder than the last. Then I reached the final page. It wasn't an email. It was a handwritten checklist. Marriage license. Joint financial meeting. Property discussion. Update beneficiaries. Every item had a date beside it. The first 3 were scheduled within 2 weeks after the wedding. At the bottom, someone had written one final sentence. "Don't mention everything at once. Introduce changes gradually." I stared at those words until they blurred. Grandma had always told me to watch patterns. Now I finally saw one. Not lies. A strategy. A carefully planned future where every important decision had already been made. Without me. I photographed the final page. Returned every document exactly where I'd found it. Closed each drawer. Straightened the folders. Then quietly walked back to my car. My hands refused to stop shaking. I locked the doors and sat there staring through the windshield as dawn painted the sky pale gold. For several minutes, I couldn't even start the engine. My phone suddenly buzzed. A message from Daniel. "Good morning, beautiful." A second message appeared. "I can't wait to marry you today." I stared at the screen. Only an hour earlier those words would have made me smile. Now, they felt like the biggest lie anyone had ever told me. By the time I arrived back at my house, the sun had fully risen. My bridesmaids were already there. The makeup artist smiled the moment she saw me. "There she is. We thought you disappeared." I forced a smile. Just needed some air. Nobody questioned it. For the next 2 hours, everyone around me laughed, took photographs, and talked about how beautiful the ceremony was going to be. I played my part perfectly. I smiled. I thanked people. I hugged relatives. Inside, however, something had changed forever. I wasn't nervous about getting married anymore. I was deciding how to walk away with my dignity. Before leaving for the venue, I printed every photograph I'd taken that morning. The emails. The financial summaries. The handwritten checklist. I placed them inside a plain white folder. Then I closed it. When I looked into the mirror one last time, I barely recognized the woman staring back. Not because of the wedding dress. Because she trusted her instincts now. The ceremony began exactly on schedule. Music filled the room. Guests stood as I walked down the aisle. Daniel smiled at me the way he always had. Warm. Confident. Completely certain about how today would end. I reached the altar. He gently squeezed my hand. "You look incredible." I simply nodded. The officiant welcomed everyone and began speaking about commitment, honesty, and lifelong partnership. The words felt strangely heavy now. Finally, he turned toward us. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." Several minutes later, he smiled. "Before these two join in marriage, is there anything either of you would like to say?" Daniel looked at me. I just want to say how lucky I am. The guest smiled. Then the officiant turned toward me. And you, Emily? I took one slow breath. Actually, the room became completely silent. I do have something I'd like to share. Daniel looked confused. What is it? I reached into the small bag beside my chair and removed the white folder. I woke up very early this morning. I kept my voice calm. I went somewhere I never expected to visit. Daniel's smile faded. His mother shifted uneasily in the front row. I wasn't looking for secrets. I opened the folder, but I found plans that involved my future. I looked directly at Daniel. Without my knowledge, I handed the first documents to my father, then another set to Daniel's older sister. Finally, I gave several pages to the officiant. Nobody spoke. Only the sound of paper turning filled the room. Daniel suddenly stepped forward. Emily. His voice was tight. Let's talk about this privately. I slowly shook my head. We've had 2 years to talk honestly. His mother stood. Those papers don't explain anything. They explain enough. I pointed toward the highlighted notes. The plans for my property. The financial timelines. The emails discussing what should happen after the wedding. Daniel rubbed both hands across his face. It's not what you think. I looked at him quietly. Then tell everyone what it is. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. The silence answered for him. Several guests exchanged confused glances. Others continued reading. My father finally closed the folder. He looked at Daniel only once. Then he walked over and stood beside me. Without saying a word, that single step told me everything. I removed my engagement ring, placed it gently on the small table beside the officiant. I'm not ending this because of one bad morning. I looked around a room. I'm ending it because trust isn't something you rebuild after discovering it never truly existed. Nobody applauded. Nobody shouted. The room remained completely still. I turned toward the guests. I'm truly sorry you traveled here expecting a wedding. A faint smile crossed my face. But I'd rather disappoint everyone for one afternoon than disappoint myself for the rest of my life. I walked back down the aisle, this time alone. Yet somehow, I had never felt stronger. 6 months later, I sold the condo Grandma left me and bought a smaller home closer to the lake. Not because I had to, because I wanted a fresh beginning. People still ask whether I really believe Grandma visited me that night. I honestly don't know. Maybe it was a dream. Maybe it was grief. Or maybe the people who love us most leave behind something far more powerful than memories. They leave us with the wisdom to recognize the truth before it's too late.